So good morning, everyone. So if I could just have everyone take a seat and don't be shy. Feel free to fill the seats up front here. So the exercise is everybody stand up and move. Welcome, welcome. We are from Caltrans, the Division of Research, Innovation, and System Information. What we do here is we put on a series of research connection events, and I'm really excited to have this event on the integration of aviation automated weather observation systems, AWOS, with roadway weather information systems, RWIS. Just a quick tad bit on agenda today, so you know what to expect. It's welcome and housekeeping items from me, Dee Lam, and I'm from the RWIS communications team. Opening remarks and introduction from Mandy Chu, and our project background, Melissa, and of course onto the media presentation from Doug Galarus. And then we'll take questions and answers at the end. So I'll go through kind of logistics on that as well. Okay, some housekeeping, very basic. Restrooms. Out the double doors there in the back, to your left, you'll see a black kind of door to the hallway. It actually has a sign on it. Feel free to enter that way, and restrooms will be to your right, both the gentlemen and the women. And then, again, silence all phones if you haven't done so already. Okay, evacuation information, just so you know, look around. There's an exit here onto the side, exit towards the back, and I believe there's an exit back here as well. Take a look at those. Our meeting area, assembly point, once we exit the building, if you can see here, there's the red "You Are Here," that's the VA building. Out, turn left to 13th, follow that up, and our meeting point is the parking lot, the corner of 13 and P. Okay, so for those joining us in the room, gosh, thank you so much. Again, for those joining us over webcast, thank you for joining. For those in the room, we'll hold our questions till the Q&A session at the end. And then for those viewing the webcast, there is this email address that we've created. Feel free to pop in your questions at any time to this email box, research.connection.event@dot.ca.gov. We will show this screen again at the end of the presentation during the Q&A session. That's all I have for housekeeping, a little bit of logistics. We'll get it started. Let me welcome Mandy Chu with the Office of Highway System Information and Performance with us, Caltrans RWIS, to the podium for opening remarks and introductions.
Thank you so much, Dee. Good morning, everyone. My name is Mandy Chu, just like what Dee was saying. I'm representing DRISI, and DRISI hosts the research connection events throughout the whole year, and to bring all the stakeholders, the researchers, and also the end users all together to learn about the research results and research products that we have. And so this is a great forum for Caltrans staff and researchers to exchange information and ultimately lead to the implementations of the research results and products. So, and today we're really lucky to have Doug Galarus here. Doug is from WTI, Western Transportation Institute. This is actually a project that I got started, and so this is very special to me. And so just let me introduce Doug a little bit. And Doug, like I said, is the project, you know, the brains behind the integrations of AWOS and RWIS. And it's been a lot of effort putting into this project because I know from firsthand experience. Doug is a research partner with us for a long time. I know Doug personally for more than 10 years, right? And he holds a Master in Science in Computer Science, MAT in Mathematics Education, MBA in Mathematics. He got over 24 years of experience in system engineering, information technology development, testing, implementations. So he is really experienced and so probably the best people to help us with this effort. And at the Western Transportation Institute, he has applied his technical expertise to the development of specific applications for transportation safety, including improved tools for roadway management, incident management, traveler information, and data communications. It seems like you're missing a few of your expertise that is not on here, but I'll let you explain that later on. So DRISI is helping Caltrans to meet the goals and objectives for the multimodal transportation. As you will hear more during his presentation, this research is very, very valuable to the general aviation community, and we have our aviation division here. And they've been assisting us for the whole project from initiation to now that we're going through the implementation phase. So, but before that comes up, I would like to introduce Melissa. She took over my project as the project manager, and she's been doing a great job. So thank you, Melissa.
Okay. All right. So my name is Melissa Clark, and I am the project manager now for this project, but I want to give you some information. This project is sponsored by Caltrans Division of Research and Innovation, but it is supported, highly supported by the Caltrans Division of Aeronautics. They've been partners with us from the very beginning, and I know Mandy touched base on this. Doug will kind of go over some of the major stakeholders in his presentation, so I'm not going to cover that, but I do want to thank those that have been involved with this project, because it has been very great experience working with them. Great group of people. One thing that I want to confuse everybody with is the name of the project has changed multiple times. So at any time today or later on, if you hear these different names, they are all related to the same project. The first name is obviously Integration of Aviation Automated Weather Observation System with Roadside Weather Information System. That's the name of the research project. The second name is Aviation Weather Share. That will be a website that was developed that you will see, and that's the baseline. And the third name, which is the name that's going to be used as we bring it into Caltrans, is the name up here, which is Aviation Weather Information. So, like I said, I wanted to confuse everybody, but there you go. So that way, if you hear them, they're all the same project. That way we can all be on the same page. Just a little brief history about the project. So this is actually the second phase of the project. The first phase was managed by Mandy Chu, and it went from February 2008 until June 2010. There was a delay due to, I hope IT is not listening, due to some technical difficulties within our IT contracts. And we were able to get the second phase started in July 2012. The basis of the first phase was to link and consolidate aviation-related systems into one place so that system managers and users would be able to access comprehensive and accurate meteorological data, and then to prepare them for their flight activities. So the goal was to go to one place to do some type of system and trip planning. And Doug will explain more and more about the website. The second phase, the purpose of that was to prepare the system for deployment to Caltrans. So they had to upgrade and update the system from a few years ago, and then with user feedback, enhancements, prepare it so that we can bring it over to Caltrans. The next phase or next section will be deploying this into Caltrans. So we've been actively working with IT, and hopefully you will see this under the Caltrans website within 2016. Crossing our fingers. Before Doug starts, though, there are some already success stories of these, and Doug, I know, is not touching on these. So one big thing is the website was already displayed at the California Aviation Day in 2014. We got a lot of positive feedback from the public, and it was presented to inform legislators, staff, and the public about the importance of aviation to the welfare of the community. That's the purpose of Aviation Day. And WTI was able to present posters, fact sheets. They created a loop video that they showed the content and operation of the system to people at the Aviation Day. It came off really well. And then a couple other things that we've already showed usefulness for this tool. The system was originally designed for general aviation pilots. However, it has already been used by emergency response agencies, both in the summer fires of this year and last year, as well as the Napa earthquake of 2014. We have a member of our team that is part of the Air Coordination Group out of the California Office of Emergency Services, and they were using this website for purposes that they were not able to see some of the data. So they have access to all of this data, but they were not able to see it in one location. So during the Napa earthquake, the ACG, the Air Coordination Group, was able to use our Aviation Weather Share portal to get more information. So it's already helped Caltrans, and we haven't even deployed it yet. All right. I think that's it. So what I'd like to do is welcome up Doug Galarus from the Western Transportation Institute. Let me get to yours, Doug. Sorry. All right.
Good morning. Well, it was a pleasant surprise to have Mandy here this morning to help introduce me, and I'm sure appreciative for the kind remarks, and Melissa as well. I knew you would be here, but this has been a good project for us, and I'm not going to take time to embellish my qualifications any further, but what I do want to do is acknowledge my project team back at WTI at Montana State University. Dan Richter, I think, is watching online at this time. He's done a lot of the hard work with development and getting the site online, and we've had a lot of good students helping us through the years, and so it's really a product of the team up there and the team down here. And I have an acknowledgement slide here shortly where I show some of the names. I want to say that my style of presentation, or putting these presentations, I kind of err on the side of putting lots of information in the presentation. And by that I mean I may not read everything to you that's on the slides. It's there for you to look at after the fact. So we'll zip through some of these things, but please refer back to it as time goes on. And I want to dwell on the cover slide just for a minute more. Melissa, I sure appreciate you talking about the naming of the project and some of the associated things that have come with the naming on it. I think to give a little bit of an idea where this project came from, and Terry Berry from Aeronautics could clarify, or Mandy could clarify this too. A number of years ago, before we started phase one, there was this idea that Aeronautics had of making use of additional sites and sensors beyond what they had out there in the form of AWOS and ASOS sites. I believe they had seen some work that was done in Iowa where the road weather information systems, the RWIS sites, were brought into a system to augment those AWOS and ASOS sites and give a greater picture of what was going on throughout the state of Iowa. And my understanding was that Aeronautics wanted to tackle something similar. In came Mandy saying, well, we have a project a lot like that where we're assisting the surface transportation folks, and that was Ian Turnbull, who's here. That was his brainchild in the whole thing, the Weather Share project way back when. And so maybe that's where some of the confusion begins on the naming, in that this effort, I think, originated with some other work that we had done. But if the name doesn't help you too well to get the picture quite yet, kind of picture that this is geared at small, rural, underserved airports, airfields, and also heliports, where they may not have the weather infrastructure that the larger facilities have. How can information be provided to them in the absence of that additional infrastructure to better augment their operations? So that's my, in a nutshell, overview of where the project came from and maybe some of the naming challenges that we faced with it. Got to put in the disclaimer slide here. You can read it later. The acknowledgments, I've mentioned many of these people. Sean Campbell's out here as well. He helped in the interim when Mandy transitioned out of the project to help get it contracted and lead into Melissa taking it over. Derek Cantar has been with us all along in the second phase of the project and really has been a great help in connecting us with the aviation community. I also need to mention San Jose State University. In phase one, we were told San Jose State is the expert in aviation as far as research goes in the state of California. So we were hooked up with San Jose State, and they've helped us with some of the stakeholder outreach. I think I've pretty much covered the abstract, so I'm going to skip on through to a housekeeping part here. I want to show you what the tasks were in the project, just to give an idea of what we've delivered and what you can have access to here at the end of the project. We've had our kickoff meeting, we've had quarterly reports and a number of other housekeeping type things that have occurred through the project management task. We also maintain an informational website that's separate from the actual application website. I give the URL here and at the end of the presentation. Please access that if you'd like to find further information and maybe some updates that were posted on the project as we went through it. One of the early tasks was a business case analysis. San Jose State helped us with this, and this was really an effort in reaching out to some of the stakeholders and trying to document the benefits in a prospective system. I'm not going to discuss this in any detail in this presentation, but I would refer you to the document that San Jose State presented. Melissa could give you access to that as needed. They did present a summary in regard to this. My team at WTI, Dan specifically, went out and researched data sources, and as you'll see subsequently, there are a lot of data sources that go into this project. Remember, as I said, it started out as a vision of taking AWOS and ASOS and augmenting it with RWIS data. Well, as happened in the surface transportation weather share project, we've added a lot more data beyond that from many other providers. So we had a task to document those sources and document additional prospective sources, and you can refer to that document as needed. System requirements. Part of the systems engineering process for developing such a system is to have detailed requirements. Well, we did our best to document a detailed set of requirements, and so that's available to you as well in the form of a deliverable. And then we came to the part of developing the system. And since we already had a phase 1 prototype, this was a task in getting it ready for phase 2 and getting it ready for people to try. Things change on the web, new browsers and new devices, which I'll allude to a little bit later, which causes maybe some concern for future deployments of how to get this out most effectively. Well, we developed the system. We actually did this early on in the project, a large part of the work, because we wanted people to be able to look at the prototype and comment on it and give us more feedback so we could incorporate that into the system. And then we implemented it. And I give you the address of the system there. You're welcome to pull it up separately. Please take a look at some time. Evaluation. I am going to talk about this quite a bit today. In retrospect, I'm fairly pleased with how the evaluation was conducted. I think we covered our bases pretty well here with a diverse methodology for doing evaluation, and I'll elaborate on that later. And we did a gap analysis too, and even though the gap analysis is something that we presented as a standalone deliverable, I'm going to give you a brief overview of that today because I think it fits in well with the evaluation, and I think it fits in well with maybe some of the other goals that were set forth for the project early on. There's a task here of determining usage status and recommendations, and in short, we intended to look at the FAA and determine perhaps how such a system might fit into official type planning for flights and so forth. It was decided that we just weren't quite at the point to discuss that yet. And so that task was rolled into a separate deliverable that we put on the website to qualify its use as we expected people to be using the system. And then, of course, we've got the final project report, which I've submitted a draft on, and this presentation today. So, we're getting closer to the fun stuff, the interesting stuff. I want to give you an overview of data retrieval and processing just briefly, and I'm not going to name all these sources. They're available for you to reference, and you can go back to that sources document that I referred to earlier for greater detail. But again, there are a large number of sources that we are pulling from to put the data into the system. We do not do weather forecasting on our own at WTI or as part of any of these systems. We are dependent on the National Weather Service, NCAR, and a number of other very large entities out there who do a far better job than we could ever dream of doing. What we do is we aggregate that data into the system so that people have one place to visit and try to determine what's going on in terms of the weather situation. So this gives you a bit of an idea of how diverse those sources are. Note that many of these sources are Caltrans sources. We are bringing in surface data by way of cameras that Ian's group has out in the field, and Sean has a portal that allows access to this data for systems like the aviation system. That plays an important role here. And this is just a schematic of some of those layers that we've aggregated together in the menus that I'll show you here shortly. I'm going to zip through these a little bit more quickly. Again, these are for your subsequent reference, and they're available in the final report as well. Here's the part that I call the fun part, the pictures. I really like the screenshots of the system. This is our menu structure, not necessarily the pretty picture, but it gives you an overview of what comes ahead in what we call the aviation layers. And I have to say, too, that really the utility of the system, I think, comes when you have bad weather events. And that's not necessarily just snow or heavy rain or what have you, but when you've got wind and dry events. It was mentioned that there's been outreach to fire and people for emergency management and those types of things. So I tried to grab screenshots as best I could. My team tried to grab screenshots when we had bad weather or interesting things. If we look today, well, it's sunny and much warmer here than it is in Montana, so it might not be quite as interesting, but we still think the system has utility at this time. This is the default screen that you'll see if you visit the website. www, I got carried away there, aviation.weathershare.org. That will take you to the website, and you will see this default screen. We have a little message that will pop up preceding this, giving a little bit more information about a tutorial and a quick start guide, and the disclaimer about the intended use of the site, and so users are keyed into those things quickly. When they first come to the site, they see what we call the AWOS-ASOS layer. In this layer, we have those airport weather facilities, those things that we contend are lacking to some degree in the rural underserved areas. We show them on the map, and we show them color-coded by the flight condition at the present time. As I'll mention later, this is something that came back through our evaluation within this phase. We did not have these color-coded initially. It may not seem like that big a deal, but people said, hey, why don't you do this? This would be tremendously useful. And Dan jumped on it right away. In fact, he had it done before I was able to, I think, even give him the go-ahead to do it. It was, I think, a really nice addition here. It took maybe more time to color the markers than to actually implement it once we had that done. So one additional thing we do here to help users who may be first-time users is, by default, we open up one of the balloons or dialog boxes associated with these sites. We got some feedback indicating that maybe some users, when they came to the site, they weren't quite sure what to do. They would see the map, they would see colors, but they might not be aware that if you click on those icons, those markers, you get further information. Well, we gave them a cue and we popped up one of them by default. We have pilot reports, and we get these through the FAA. Terminal aerodrome forecasts as well. These come in near real time, and we put them on the site as available. This morning I looked, and there was one pilot report off the coast. I guess probably because not so much activity going on, or maybe not so much bad weather at the time, but at other times there may be a lot of these. What they're showing through the pilot reports are reports from pilots in the air of conditions like icing and turbulence. Airports. This is a Caltrans layer that was provided to us as a reference, again, to show where the facilities are. Not all of these airports have AWOS or ASOS sites, or maybe they do, but the data is not put out there from these sites. And so to look at those in conjunction with the weather feeds was seen as something useful. Included is heliport data. And so the heliport data can be toggled on and off as well. And the thought was, going back again to phase 1 and follow up a little bit in phase 2, that EMS personnel who are running life flight type operations could benefit from the system as well, because who knows where they might have to land, let alone they may not have weather equipment on their sites where they're taking off from. SIGMETs and AirMETs. This was an interesting layer. These are forecasted conditions like icing, mountain obscuration, turbulence, and so forth. These come in the form of polygon forecasts, and as you can see, sometimes they cover almost the entire western United States. We made the decision to show these as a whole rather than cut them off at the border. It was a little easier implementation-wise, but you can kind of get an idea of the scope of these when you've got a weather event going on. They can cover a large area. Radar. Radar, we get a layer from the National Weather Service, as well as what I would call kind of an interpolated 1-hour precipitation layer. They're taking the radar data along with some other data and extrapolating from that what they believe was the rainfall over a 1-hour period. We've included that in the system too. Satellite imagery. There's a wide variety of satellite imagery out there and coloring schemes. Forgive me, but I can't explain all of these to you. I'd have to go back to some of our references, but we've tried to make the 5 or so that are available to us available within the system, thinking that there may be some utility in all of those. And when I get to the evaluation later, I can point out some of the feedback we've received on this. And then we get to my favorite layer. I like to show this one off quite a bit. Dan back home gives me a bad time on it because I always navigate to this first. I'm really proud of this display. Sometimes it gets jumbled, but what we're showing here is the wind aloft forecast. And I'm showing it at 2 separate levels. I believe I have 3,000 feet on the left-hand side and 15,000 feet on the right-hand side. You can see the dramatic change there. And the hope is that this is an intuitive display in that people can look at it and without having to do a whole lot of processing in their head, they can really recognize where the trouble spots are, and then they can drill down to further information by clicking on the markers. Here you see a good part of the central and southern part of the state covered by big red arrows indicating that there would be high winds at 15,000 feet. Now, the determination of the cutoff of 15,000 feet is something that we've touched on in the evaluation, and maybe there's still room for going a little bit higher there, but for our target audience, that seemed to be the area of most interest, between 3,000 feet above mean sea level up to 15,000 feet. Similarly, we've got air temperature forecasts, and so from this you might get some indication of when icing is potential at particular altitudes. Now the surface layers. We've used this kind of as a hodgepodge category. I apologize for the generic naming here, and maybe that's something that could be revisited at some point. We have the National Weather Service alerts. Again, this is for surface alerts, surface forecast alerts. So winter weather advisory, winter weather warning, these sorts of things you'll find in this layer. Again, looking at rural, underserved areas, looking at EMS having to take off and land virtually anywhere. This was thought to be of interest and use. And so those surface forecasts, what's going on the ground, or what's projected to go on, are included here. And then we get to the Caltrans CCTV images, which I think in many of these systems, even though they're weather-oriented, these tend to be most popular. And even for aviation, recognizing that the cameras aren't pointed up in the sky, there still is value in this, and we've been told this over and over again. To see the visibility, to see the snow, to see the rain, to see other things that we've been told is very valuable. And I know Ian's done outreach with some of his pilot friends, and they've commented even before this project began of the value of those camera images, and so we've tried to bring them into the system as we've done in others. And the screenshots here from bad weather times, I think, demonstrate that utility. Forecast layers, again, there's value in looking at not just what's happening up above, but what's happening on the ground or forecast to happen. So similar kind of visual display that you would have seen for the winds aloft and temperature aloft. Here we have forecast air temperature, forecast wind speed, forecast wind gust speeds, humidity, sky cover, which has proven popular, chance of precipitation, as well as the forecast amount of precipitation. And then eventually the potential for snow, which I'm sure many of you are eager for to have this year, maybe not down here in Sacramento, but up in the hills. and kind of a general forecast that the National Weather Service gives us for this layer, simply indicating the type of weather that will occur, whether it be snow, rain, a mix, heavy blowing conditions, heavy wind conditions. And last but not least, I come to the layer that maybe was most inspired by the early work on the Surface Transportation Weather Share project. We have here readings from many different sites and sources of current weather conditions. Now, if you take those AWOS ASOS sites, I believe there's somewhere in the ballpark of 100 or more of them in the state of California, at least that we can get data from. Throw in the RWIS sites. Again, we're talking on the order of maybe 100 to 150 or 200 sites. By adding data from additional sources out there, and we use MEDIS, MesoWest, and have toyed with a few other potential sources, we can increase that count to potentially on the order of 1,000 to 2,000 sites. And so that's what you're seeing here, although we can't display 1,000 to 2,000 markers every time on the map. You have to zoom in for further detail. But there's a lot of information here about what's going on at present. Wind speed and humidity, same story here. I do want to say that it's interesting, whereas my favorite displays of the wind forecast kind of have a nice uniform feel to them. When you bring in the actual wind readings from the sites in the field, you get kind of a jumbled mess. And then there are data quality issues too, which we've discussed many times in the context of this project and other projects, but continues to be a challenge. What data is good? What data is bad? Should you preclude the bad from the good? Maybe you judge something as bad that actually is good. We've taken an approach on here where we try to show as much as possible. So you may see some wind arrows, like the one near the Death Valley area there, that looks suspect. We're not entirely sure whether it is or isn't, but in the greater context here, we think people will get a big picture idea of what the conditions are. And then we've got the precipitation layers as well, aggregated by hourly and 24-hour, as well as a link to the individual RWIS stations. Like what we had for the AWOS ASOS sites, people can pull up the RWIS sites and look at the detail from those sites. Now let's get to the evaluation. Again, I'm going to talk about a multi-pronged approach here, where we had a focus group survey conducted by San Jose State. We have an online survey on the website available for users at any time to provide feedback on. And then what I think is kind of interesting, not necessarily novel, but it's something that we really kicked in with this project in parallel with one of our other projects, is the use of Google Analytics to not only see how many users there were, but what are those users doing. And we did a lot of work to try to facilitate that. And then I put in parentheses our gap analysis, because I think that feeds into our evaluation. So, focus group survey. Forgive me, I put quotes in here directly as they came, so you will see some typographical errors. I won't claim credit for all of them, but they are directly as they came because I didn't want to edit any of these. In the final report, we included all of the comments verbatim, so nothing hidden there, no cherry picking or anything. But what you'll see is, through San Jose State's work with some early stakeholders that were identified by Caltrans, you'll see what I think were some very good comments, including some that we could act on immediately, and some others that needed to be deferred but should be taken into consideration in the future. So, as an example, general question, and we've opted for a number of these things for maybe a more free-form type answer than the objective yes, no, rankings, and so forth. You'll see a bit of that in our online survey, but here I think it proved that some of these free-form answers were very helpful. I did show a few of the more positive ones here, I admit that, but there are some where they're pointing out some deficiencies, including things that we needed to act on. Now, it said that at the very top, it's nice to have AWOS and Caltrans info in a single location. Well, in general, what I think they're saying there is it's nice to have the RWIS data and the cameras alongside the AWOS ASOS data, and that validates to some degree the original concept that the project had. There are some other comments where they talk about state boundaries, and we've talked about this many times in working through the project, and the decision was made to keep the system, with maybe a few exceptions like the airmet SIGMET warnings, confined to the borders of California. With that said, people pointed out that their flights are not restricted in that manner. And so there is interest, even if they are flying within the state, in what's going on across the border. Because there may be information immediately across the border that's closer to them than what's within their own borders. So that's a very good comment, and it's something to keep in mind. Number of other positives there. I think a fair amount helped to justify our general approach of making the system intuitive and easy to use. We move on. Let's see, again, the road cam layer is a good idea. Many pilots might not think about this if using other systems or sites, and so having that in this system was good. There's some comparison here to some of the other sites, and I don't want to dwell on that too much. Again, we see this specific example of somebody in far northwestern California saying, I'd really like to look across the Oregon border because that's close to me. So, good point there. This first comment for question number 2, how do you think the system could be improved? Well, could you take those airport icon colors and indicate the current conditions in terms of instrument flight rules and so forth? Great idea. Why didn't we think of that? Well, we ran with that one, and we have the current default display doing this, and we think it's been pretty well received. There's a lot of discussion in here about the use of plain English versus raw data. The METAR readings that come in are encoded, and I'm sure that pilots are well versed in decoding these, but we felt strongly that we needed to make them readable to us, and users have indicated a similar need for those, and maybe some of the TAF forecasts and so forth. We tried to do our best on that. There may still be a little bit to be desired. Is there any way to integrate icing? I think those airmet and SIGMET layers came subsequent to this initial survey, and that may have partially fulfilled that request. Cloud ceilings and tops are common needs for pilots. Somebody also mentioned an interest in a flight path tool, and specifically that comes from the National Weather Service's ADS site. We may have discussed that, but I don't believe that we took it any further. The idea here is that you would help to construct a flight path, including altitude, and be able to look at that path in conjunction with the weather conditions or the forecast conditions. Again, really good feedback. I'm going to hit on just a couple more of these. The top one came back on us, and it's been really an interesting aspect to this. What suggestions do you have for developers of this system? Kind of along the same lines, what more would you like to see? I said, how about an iPhone app? Well, way back when we were first starting up phase 1, maybe smartphones were out there a little bit, and I had a precursor to some of today's smartphones, but there certainly weren't iPhones, and we weren't quite geared up to do that. Anyhow, here we are where everybody has smartphones, and even some pilots are using smartphones and tablets in the air. Just as we walk a fine line with surface transportation, and you know how bad it is to use your phone when driving, I'm going to say because I'll take responsibility for being the heavy on this. I've been somewhat reluctant to cross over that border or that boundary of advocating use of such things until I was sure that we really could do a good job of it. And I'm not sure that we could have within the scope of this project. We really wanted to focus on the desktop display and making it as good as possible. With that said, people are using these devices, and to my understanding, they're even using them up in the air, and so that will probably have to happen. Right now, the rich displays that I showed you don't translate very well to the tiny screens of the smartphones. Last thing, any other comments? Again, I pointed out some of the positives here. There are a few deficiencies. I can't remember if it's on this slide. It may have been on a predecessor here. Something that's been really key in many of our projects, and I'm not entirely sure that the solution is there, people indicate, hey, we like it, this is a great tool. Be careful. If you get people using this on a regular basis, and then all of a sudden it goes away, that's a problem. And so this work that Caltrans is doing internally to bring the system in, well, that's pretty important that succeed, because otherwise if people are tapped into the system and all of a sudden it goes away for whatever reason, the good work kind of goes for naught and they're disappointed. The online survey, I'm going to qualify this first of all by saying we haven't had a lot of responses here to the online survey, and in fact I think, Melissa, correct me if I'm wrong, I think some of these responses came from your colleagues when you put it out there, and so many of Melissa's colleagues aren't pilots and aviators, and so they may not have been looking at it in exactly the same way that the prospective audience is looking at it. And so when I talk about utility of some of the layers in here, take it with a grain of salt. It may not be entirely representative, but as a mechanism for gauging some of these things with maybe a wider audience using the site, I think it has its benefits. I'm just going to show a couple of the responses here, a couple of the questions and the responses that we received. We wanted to get an idea of the utility of some of these layers and whether or not people thought that they were useful. Not surprisingly, wind, in terms of the surface conditions, the current conditions, ranked at the top. Alongside that was air temperature. I was a little bit surprised to see precipitation ranking a little bit lower, and I can't tell you whether that is a reflection on our presentation of that data, maybe something's lacking there, or a reflection on they don't think precipitation's all that useful. It does make a little bit of sense that, you know, icing would take precedence over precipitation maybe, but I'll leave this for you to ponder, and I think the aviation folks would be a little better suited to maybe evaluate this evaluation here as to what's being said. The RWIS stations, though, came out ranked pretty high as well. If we look at the surface forecast layers, again, air temperature, wind speed, and wind gust rank fairly high. Some of the other things, like precipitation, again, are ranked kind of low. This could be more a reflection of the audience that participated in that survey. With that said, we did have people who identified themselves as pilots and aviation types. Several of the respondents were that. So, CCTV images, NWS alerts also rank pretty high. I'm a bit concerned when somebody tells me that they can't find something in the website, although one of the prior comments, or several of the prior comments, indicated that there's so much information there that you probably can't find all of it in one sitting. So maybe that's an indication of this as well. These ones are where I think I saw maybe the most conflicting information that I would think in terms of intuitive responses that we'd have. The wind aloft and temperature aloft layers ranked lower than some of the other layers. I've thought all along that these were maybe the more useful of the aviation layers. So I'm not sure if there's something here, or again, a reflection of the audience. But they did find that that AWOS ASOS layer was very useful, including the color coding that we had on it. I want to go quickly through the Google Analytics statistics, and we'll get to the gap analysis, and it looks like we're going to finish up roughly on time. Again, what we tried to do here with Google Analytics is go beyond simply how many people are using it and maybe where are they from. We wanted to get to what they were doing. First off, I'm going to show you a little bit of where they came from. This is always interesting on these projects. Without really advertising, some way or another, people find their way to things. And I think a big part of the reason for that is Google. When project information gets put out there, they can find it by Google, by way of Google, with searching for maybe something totally different. Some way or another, we managed to get 100 participation from 128 communities in California with virtually no advertisement. Now, with that said, statistics for number of sessions and number of users on this project are actually fairly low because we didn't advertise it. It was a very limited group that we put out there for. But other people just managed to find a way to it. Grand majority of these, Sacramento specifically, and Redding followed by that, we think were principals on the project, on the technical advisory committee, and those who used it regularly. There was quite a bit of other use that came in from other places. Here's where we got to what we implemented as a mechanism for determining what people were doing on the site. We had several types of events. Recall that we have menus on the site that allow people to select different layers. We track those selections. We have markers on the site that allow people to dig down to further information, like show a camera image. We track all of those events, and what you're going to see here are the aggregates of that. When it came to the surface condition events, people did visit that menu. That's the top menu select there. Within that menu, people chose wind speed more than any of the others. They also chose air temperature, followed by precipitation, RWIS stations, and so forth. Humidity, we might see from this, although I think more data would be prudent for an evaluation. Humidity doesn't seem to be that great an area of interest for aviation, at least for the users that have tried the system so far. If we look at the actual markers where people have clicked on markers to gather more information, kind of similar. The RWIS stations, though, get bumped up to the top because really with the RWIS stations, other than a subtle change of the color of the marker, you don't get any information by just looking at it on the map. You have to click to see what the conditions are there. So the RWIS stations go up. For some reason or another, humidity ranked a little bit higher than hourly precipitation and 24-hour precipitation here, but not by much. If we look at the surface forecast layers, again, maybe not a whole lot of surprises here. People, again, were picking wind speed as as a higher preference than some of the other things. Humidity ranked very low. Snow ranked low as well. I think maybe that's a function of there not being a whole lot to look at. The snow season is limited, the area over which snow falls is limited, and in the past couple years, there hasn't been a lot of snow. Selection events for these, again, wind gust speed are all up there at the top. Now, if we look at the CCTV layer selections and the National Weather Service alerts, they were getting selected as well. Notice the big bump in the CCTV individual marker selections. To see the camera images, you have to click on the marker, and people were doing that. Finally, for these aviation layers, we have the winds aloft, the AWOS, ASOS, the SIGMETs, and so forth. I'm not sure that we saw a whole lot of surprises here. We elaborate on this a little bit in the final report. But we did find that for the things that require selection for further information, like the pilot reports, the terminal aerodrome forecasts, and so forth, that people did actually drill down and click on them, so they were doing what they needed to do. Winds aloft received more attention in terms of just the layer selection itself. People don't need to select the markers to glean information from that layer, so a little bit lesser marker selection there isn't a bad thing. Temperature aloft is kind of interesting, I guess. We didn't get as much selection of that layer as others. I'm sure maybe there are greater reasons for that, but the wind, again, is the most prominent item. Now we have the gap analysis. And going back to phase one, to give you a little bit of an idea of what we were trying to achieve here as a follow-up in phase two, I believe the original idea in phase one, beyond simply giving an augmented picture through the addition potentially of RWIS sites, beyond what was there for AWOS and ASOS, was that maybe longer term there could be some sort of planning benefit from knowing which areas are covered, first by AWOS, ASOS, next by RWIS in addition to that, and maybe beyond this with the other sites that we can include in the system. Maybe there could be some planning benefits so that if new sites were to be developed for aviation purposes, they could be prioritized. And so we revisited that issue here in the second phase, and I'll say that even if that portion doesn't come to fruition, and I do qualify the work that we've done here as a starting point, not necessarily end all. People need to look further into this before rolling equipment out. But even if that part doesn't come to fruition, if we could assess the coverage of the system as it stands and show where we think it has good coverage and where maybe the coverage is limited, that's yet another evaluation of the system that was developed that could either help to show its prospective benefit or show that maybe it doesn't add a lot. Well, it adds quite a bit in terms of coverage, and I'll show you that through these diagrams. What we did is we took what we called reporting AWOS ASOS sites, and I have that qualification on there because it's important. These are sites that we receive data from. We don't receive it directly, we receive it from the FAA. But these are sites that contribute data into the system by way of the FAA's feed of AWOS and ASOS data. There may be other deployments of AWOS and ASOS out there, but we can't tap into the data. So as you see gaps here, realize that maybe they could be filled by existing systems simply by getting that data out through the dissemination mechanism. Well, blue here indicates coverage up to kind of an arbitrary selection of 25 miles away. If you're 25 miles or less from an AWOS ASOS site, you get colored in blue. If you're on the fringe, you get colored in white, and if you're outside that, you get colored in red. Therefore, the red is identified as a gap. I don't think you'll be surprised in looking at this map, seeing the red spots on here, because they are the rural, underserved areas. In Southern California, an area that I'm not quite as familiar with as I am Northern California, a lot of this is the desert region. And so I'm not even sure what the potential is for getting more infrastructure out there. But having worked with Ian and his crew at District 2, we realized that there is quite a bit of potential, at least along the roadway in Northern California, to get equipment out in fairly rural spots. And they've done that as well as anybody. If we add to the mix the RWIS sites, and again, qualified by ones that we can pull in data for and receive into our system, you get a little bit expanded coverage. There are some gaps in here where Caltrans knows that there are RWIS sites, and in fact, I think they're in the process of getting the data feeds. I'm looking at Sean. Sean's nodding in agreement. They're getting the data feeds from some of those sites down in District 9 in the Death Valley and Bishop area and Mammoth area out there so that they can be used by these systems. But as of the time we did this analysis, they weren't in there, and so they didn't contribute. But you get a little bit of added coverage. Now let's throw in all of the weather sites that this system uses. And at least in terms of that 25-mile radius that we chose, it shows greatly expanded coverage. Now, I qualify this by saying we didn't just choose any old site or any old data to light up as being covered. We used MesoWest and MEDIS's quality control indicators and only took the data that they said was good, and only took data that was reporting with a frequency of 15 minutes or better. They were giving data every 15 minutes. This was kind of a strict standard because the AWOS ASOS data that we tap into only comes in on an hourly basis. And some of the RWIS data is right on the fringe of 15 minutes as well, and so it may not have shown up in here. With that said, those other sites that are augmenting the system really add to the coverage. There are still some gaps. You can see them here, and those might be places where you would initiate a discussion for the potential to deploy more infrastructure. Another look at this, just briefly, we listed the airfields relative, again, to these AWOS ASOS sites that we can get data from. there were 40 airports that fall more than 25 miles from one of these AWOS ASOS sites that are disseminating their data. That's not to say that some of these may have their own equipment and they'd be scratched from the list, but at least in terms of our data feeds, these could be considered underserved. If we add all those other sites, the MEDAS, MesoWest sites, and the RWIS sites, along with the qualifications I put on that list gets reduced to 18. Again, this could be a starting point for discussion as to where the truly underserved areas are, with the caveat that they may have equipment that we're just unaware of because the data isn't out there. So in conclusion, I think we're pretty close to the time where I'm supposed to conclude. Well, the feedback has been pretty good. Again, recognizing that it has been limited. It's been put out to a small targeted audience and in general to whoever might find it without it having been advertised. It's been pretty good, and we've gotten some useful suggestions from all of the forms of feedback that we put out there. The system does appear to be on the right track. I think judging from survey responses, usage of the system, and so forth, for the most part, it is going down the right path. Something that we felt was important and should be followed up on, I think, with Caltrans in internalizing this system, we think there's great benefit in this Google Analytics data. But I will say that it doesn't all just come for free, so to speak. By that I mean you really have to work to define the events, and you really have to glean the data from those events that are generated to turn that into actionable items. This layer is getting used versus this layer is not getting used, and maybe there's a problem in implementation with this layer versus the actual utility of it. That's a more complicated process, but what we think is we've put the seeds in place to help make that to be a really valuable tool. Users seem most interested in wind speed. I think that comes through from the surveys, again, with the caveat that the online survey with a little bit different audience didn't specifically say that. Most other indications are wind speed is most popular. Cloud ceilings were identified as very useful. It was said that this data is out there in some locations, but not all locations. I'm not sure we have an answer through the data sources portion of this to a great source for cloud ceilings. That's something that should be looked into. The gap analysis indicated that there are some underserved areas, and again, this is relative to the data that's accessible by the prototype system. These underserved areas are extremely rural, located in the northeast, northwest, west central, east central, and southeast portions of the state. There are a number of airfields, though, in these areas. And certainly there would be EMS incidents in these areas where helicopters would be flying to them, and so the need for weather isn't necessarily diminished by rural. Again, the premise of this project was that those rural underserved areas needed augmented information to help. Aside from identifying the gaps, what we found was that we think the gap analysis may have been most useful in at least showing the amount of information that's added by this sort of system beyond just the basic sites that are out there. And in turn, maybe some indication of the utility of adding that information. And so, otherwise, the gap analysis may be helpful in starting a discussion of where to deploy equipment in the future, but that's a big effort, and this could only be considered a starting point. Certainly more work would have to be done to decide where the greatest priorities are. With that said, I may have gone 2 or 3 minutes over, but I think we're close to the end. And Dee, Melissa, I'll defer to you as to how you want to handle the next portion. Sorry, I'll take the jacket off. Back to Montana sweats. Extremely hot California October weather.
Thank you, Doug, Melissa. I think you did a great job. Just a quick post-event note here before we take questions. The slides and a webcast recording will be available upon production as soon as we can get it edited and so on and so forth on our website. I will work on getting it on the slides as well as where our website is. It is the DrySI Internet on the Research Connection page. If you haven't signed in already and like to leave your email address in the sign-up sheets in the back, we can send you information that way as well. And the links, you can definitely forward them to who may be interested. And then also stay tuned for the next research event that we'll be having. So with that, let me go ahead and go back to the slide with the email where viewers online can submit your questions. Again, it's research.connection.event@dot.ca.gov. For webcast purposes and sound, I will go around with the roaming mic if you have any questions in the room.
We have live voice. We'll take questions in the room first, if that's okay, and then we'll do questions, Linda, from the online afterwards. Okay. Can you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Lai. I work for DrySI. My question is, based on the comment that other people are talking about information from outside the state, has there been indication that other states are interested in something like this and are can potentially build their own system where we can then interconnect it to?
Okay, I guess you're looking at me for an answer for that. So we have had interest. For us to put it past the California borders, there would need to be multi-agency interest. So that would be like Oregon DOT, Nevada DOT, Arizona DOT for our neighboring states, Washington DOT. Go ahead.
I may have thrown Melissa and Terry and Derek a curve by including those comments in there, but those were, multiple people mentioned that. Again, we really focused in this phase of the project on California's needs because that was the intent from the beginning. I can't say specifically that other states have come to us on the WTI side recognizing or asking for expansion of this. With that said, it is something that's technically doable because many, if not most, of these data layers are available, either covering a large portion of the country, if not all of the country. Challenge comes in with some of the specific layers like the Caltrans CCTV images or the RWIS images. On other related projects, and Sean has done a lot of the legwork on this, we have made efforts to bring in that data from other states, but it's not the same from everybody. And so technically, I think it's something that could be done. Whether or not that's something that Caltrans Aviation feels is within their purview, I can't speak to.
And going on that, at the time that we are trying to pull this in for deployment, that is not going to be in the initial phase. We're going to try and pull over the system as is before we add other states. So that would most likely be down the road if Aviation wants to do that. I'm looking at Terry and Derek, and they're shaking their head. And then someone else had a question. Can you introduce yourself as well?
Hi, Tarek Tafshiri, and I'm new to the Division of Aeronautics. The question is this project started as mainly targeting airport managers, if I could understand that correctly. It's a tool to help local airports, and it appears that over time it's there's thought that it could help emergency management, firefighting, and it also could provide real-time data for pilots. And with that, looking to the future, are you thinking of potentially customizing the look, the feel of the site to customize it to their specific needs? Because I think potentially it could even be more effective tool if different users can access it, the information that they need. So I hope that question made sense.
I think that's an excellent observation. I can't speak to what Caltrans will do in the future once they take over maintaining and supporting the system. With that said, it's been an interesting challenge on other projects trying to address similar issues as to what you're describing. Needs are different for different communities of users. Early on in the original WeatherShare project, there was an effort to allow a great deal of personalization within the site. I had to make a decision when I took over management responsibilities on that project that the complexity that had introduced into the project was more than we were able to take on at the time. Again, I acknowledge that need, and I think that it could be very useful, but I guess at this point in the project, maybe as a warning from the technical side, from my own experience, if you do go down that path, be really careful, because you can take something that is of general use and turn it into a very complicated system of lots of specific uses that you may not fully understand, and in turn actually reduce the utility of the system. Just my own
So
perspective.
this request has actually come up a few times. One of the things that we have, Division of Aeronautics and DRISI has met with IT about this, is we want to keep back the focus of the project, and it was for general aviation, it was for the airport managers, it was for heliports. Because this emergency services system has come up as a request, we have to reiterate the fact that the system was not designed for emergency services. We're glad that they're using it, we're glad that they're benefiting from it, but the original usage is for airports. So actually, as we bring it back into Caltrans, it'll be connected to the Division of Aeronautics and not to our emergency services office under maintenance. So this has come up multiple times. So initially, for the sake of this project and the sake of implementation, it'll still be focused on general aviation. If further down the road, our emergency office, Division of Maintenance, wants to get involved and make it into something that they can use, that would be a separate project. But that has come up a few times from IT. So, good question. Anyone else in the room?
I think just want to check with any questions online that we may have?
There aren't any questions online at this time.
All right. Do you have anything else? All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for coming. Like Dee said, if you guys have further questions, you can email them to the same email address, and we can address them later. This presentation will be recorded and will be put on our intranet website. And thank you, everybody, for attending.